Brad Pitt had it all: the dream marriage, the perfect family, the career every actor envied. But in one night, everything collapsed. A violent fight on a private jet ripped his family apart, turning Hollywood's golden father into a broken man accused of losing control. He drowned in alcohol, confessed he had lost his wife, his kids, and himself. Even the Oscar he finally won felt like ashes in his hands. And now, at 60, living in silence, chiseling stone in solitude, the world can't stop asking, how did Brad Pitt's perfect life turn into his darkest tragedy? Brad Pitt's story didn't begin with red carpets or flashing cameras. It began in the quiet town of Springfield, Missouri, where the boy who would one day be crowned Hollywood's golden man was just William Bradley Pitt, the son of a strict father who ran a trucking company and a mother who filled the home with faith and discipline. His childhood was painted in shades of small-town normalcy, Sunday church services, high school football games, and dreams that felt far bigger than the Midwest sky. From the start, Brad carried the weight of expectations. His father believed in hard work and toughness, values he tried to instill in his son. His mother, more gentle but no less determined, taught him the importance of faith, family, and perseverance. These early lessons built the foundation of his character, yet they also planted a restlessness inside him. For while Springfield gave him roots, it never gave him wings. As a teenager, Brad was charming, handsome, and effortlessly popular. He excelled in school, played sports, and dabbled in the arts. But deep down, he knew none of it was enough. He would later confess that he always felt like he was meant for something more, something greater than the familiar streets of Missouri could ever offer. College at the University of Missouri gave him a taste of independence, but textbooks and lectures left him unfulfilled. He once said that sitting in class, he couldn't stop hearing a whisper in his mind. There's something out there, and you're not going to find it here. That whisper grew louder until one day, just 2 credits short of graduation, Brad packed up his car, filled with nothing but dreams and a few belongings, and drove west to Los Angeles. It was a reckless gamble, but it was also the spark of destiny. That decision marked the true beginning of Brad Pitt's journey, a choice that would carry him from obscurity to stardom, and eventually into the storms of personal tragedy that no one could have foreseen. Arriving in Los Angeles, Brad Pitt was just another young man with a handsome face, a second-hand car, and an impossible dream. The city was crowded with hopefuls chasing the same starlight, but Brad carried with him a stubborn belief that he could break through. He worked odd jobs to survive, sometimes dressing up as a giant chicken to hand out flyers for a fast food chain, other times chauffeuring strippers to parties just to make enough money to pay rent. Every humiliation, every long night of struggle, he endured with a quiet determination. He studied acting with intensity, taking classes under teachers who pushed him to dig beyond his looks, to find the depth within. For years, casting agents dismissed him as nothing more than a pretty face. He was offered small, forgettable roles in soap operas and television series. Yet behind the smile, Brad was desperate to prove that he was more than Hollywood's next poster boy. The climb was grueling. His roommates and fellow actors were dropping out one by one, beaten down by rejection. But Brad refused to go home. In interviews years later, he admitted that he didn't have a backup plan, that failure simply wasn't an option. That hunger, combined with an almost reckless persistence, kept him moving from one audition to the next. It was in this relentless grind that his break finally came. In 1991, Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise gave him only a few minutes on screen as a charming drifter named J.D., but those minutes changed everything. Hollywood and the audience took notice. With a cowboy hat, a hairdryer, and a dazzling smile, Brad Pitt went from struggling unknown to an overnight sensation. Suddenly, his name was on everyone's lips, and doors that had once been locked tight began to swing open. But with fame came a new kind of pressure, and Brad would soon discover that being seen as the most desirable man in the world was both a blessing and a curse. The image of perfection was beginning to take shape, one that the real Brad would spend decades struggling to live up to. The role in Thelma and Louise was only the spark. What followed was a fire that swept across Hollywood and beyond. Almost overnight, Brad Pitt became the embodiment of desire, a man whose face could stop traffic and whose name alone could sell out theaters. Women adored him, men envied him, and the press crowned him the new golden boy of the screen. But Brad, beneath the glare of the spotlight, wrestled with what that fame really meant. His early breakout films, From A River Runs Through It to Legends of the Fall, cemented his image as the romantic hero, the rugged yet sensitive leading man who seemed almost too perfect to be real. Audiences swooned at his presence, critics recognized his charisma, and directors lined up to capture his magnetism. The young man from Missouri had arrived at the summit most could only dream of. Yet even as Hollywood wrapped him in adoration, Brad himself was uneasy. He knew that beauty fades, that fame is fickle, and that an image can become a prison. In private moments, he pushed himself into roles that defied his looks. He chose darker, more complex characters, men broken by rage or haunted by shadows, as if trying to convince the world and himself that he was more than a pretty face. Films like Seven and Fight Club showed a different side of Brad Pitt, one that was raw, unsettling, and unafraid to take risks. The gamble paid off, and the industry began to see him as an actor of substance rather than just a star of posters. But with every step higher came a stronger pull from the world outside the camera. Paparazzi chased him down streets, tabloids dissected his love life, and the label of sexiest man alive followed him everywhere he went. The man who once drove to Los Angeles with nothing but a car full of dreams now carried the weight of being Hollywood's most watched, most desired, and most scrutinized figure. This was the peak of his ascension, when Brad Pitt was not just an actor but a global icon. Yet it was also the beginning of a tension that would follow him for decades. The gap between the image of perfection and the flawed human being beneath it. That gap would widen with every success, until it finally split open in ways that would devastate his life. At the height of his fame, Brad Pitt's life seemed like a fairy tale. The press could not get enough of him, and when he began dating Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart from Friends, the world found its perfect couple. Their love story appeared to be a Hollywood dream made real, a union of beauty, charm, and talent that gave people hope in an industry known for fleeting romances. When they married in 2000, the wedding was celebrated as though royalty had tied the knot. Fireworks lit up the California night, and the photos of the smiling couple became the stuff of legend. Together, Brad and Jennifer seemed untouchable. They walked red carpets hand in hand, radiating affection, and the tabloids hailed them as the golden couple. Fans saw in them not just celebrities, but symbols of stability in an unstable world. Interviews painted them as best friends as well as lovers, partners who supported each other's careers and shared a vision of family and home. Behind the smiles, however, cracks were already beginning to form. Brad's restless nature, his hunger for deeper roles and more adventurous projects, often clashed with Jennifer's focus on her television career. While he was chasing artistic transformation in films like Troy and Ocean's 11, she was under relentless pressure from the success of Friends. Both were icons in their own right, but their lives were moving in different directions. Whispers began to spread in the press about Brad's dissatisfaction, about his longing for something bigger than the glamorous marriage he was living. For Jennifer, the growing attention on her husband's career and his constant proximity to other leading ladies became harder to ignore. The golden image of perfection started to strain under the weight of ambition and expectation. Still, to the outside world, they remained flawless. Every photo shoot, every red carpet moment, reinforced the idea of a love too perfect to break. Yet behind closed doors, Brad's search for meaning was pulling him toward a path that would soon shatter everything he had built. That path would lead to Angelina Jolie, and to a scandal that forever changed the way the world saw Brad Pitt. When Brad Pitt stepped onto the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004, he was already the picture of Hollywood perfection, married to Jennifer Aniston and admired by millions. But fate had other plans. His co-star, Angelina Jolie, was unlike anyone he had ever met. Fiercely independent, magnetic, and unpredictable, she carried an energy that pulled Brad into a world far from the controlled image he had been living. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, and soon whispers began to spread that the passion did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. The tabloids exploded with speculation. Photos of Brad and Angelina together fueled a frenzy that became one of the biggest celebrity scandals of the decade. Jennifer Aniston, beloved by audiences worldwide, became the heartbroken figure in the middle of a media storm. Fans were outraged, siding with Jennifer, branding Brad as the unfaithful husband who had walked away from the perfect marriage. The golden couple was shattered, and the world watched every detail with fascination and fury. Brad himself later admitted that filming with Angelina changed him. She challenged him, inspired him, and opened his eyes to causes and passions he had never truly embraced before. Together they seemed unstoppable, a pair who combined beauty, talent, and a global mission. Their romance was framed as both scandalous and intoxicating, a fire that consumed everything in its path. For Jennifer, the pain was immense. She spoke little publicly, but her silence only fueled the narrative of betrayal. For Brad, the choice to be with Angelina was both liberating and destructive. He had followed his heart, but in doing so, he became a symbol of Hollywood's darkest temptations. His once flawless image now carried a permanent scar. Yet out of the scandal grew something Brad believed was worth the risk. With Angelina, he found not only love, but a vision of family that went far beyond Hollywood glamour. Together, they would build a household unlike any other, one that the public would idolize, but that would eventually become the source of his greatest joy and his deepest sorrow. When Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie finally stepped into the public eye as a couple, the scandal that had once threatened to destroy them seemed to transform into a powerful new narrative. They were no longer just movie stars, they became a phenomenon. Their family quickly grew into what the media called the Jolie-Pitt dynasty, a blended household of adopted and biological children that captured the world's attention. Maddox from Cambodia, Zahara from Ethiopia, Pax from Vietnam, and then their biological children, Shiloh, Knox, and Vivian. Each new arrival was followed by headlines, photographs, and endless fascination. For Brad, fatherhood was no longer a dream, but a reality lived on a massive scale. He was often seen carrying his children through airports, crouching down to their level, or holding them close against the chaos of flashing cameras. To many, he seemed like the perfect dad, the man who balanced global stardom with late-night feedings and diaper changes. Interviews at the time painted him as proud, almost overwhelmed by the life he and Angelina had built together. But beneath the glossy magazine spreads, their family life was far from simple. 6 children, each with unique backgrounds and needs, meant constant movement, endless responsibilities, and pressure that would test even the strongest partnership. The world saw a glamorous clan jet-setting from continent to continent, but what they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the private arguments, and the growing tension between two people who were both fiercely independent and stubbornly strong-willed. Angelina often spoke about how their children were her anchor, her reason for everything she did. Brad echoed those sentiments. Yet privately, the demands of such a vast family left him searching for balance. He had grown up in a quiet Missouri household, and now his life had become a whirlwind of noise, chaos, and the constant watch of cameras. The dynasty he and Angelina created was adored by millions, but for Brad it was also becoming a weight that he sometimes struggled to carry. Still, in those early years, the world was convinced they were witnessing something extraordinary, a new kind of Hollywood family, one that symbolized love without borders and unity in diversity. For Brad, it was the height of personal fulfillment, the image of the perfect father multiplied 6 times over. But as history would show, even this dream could not withstand the cracks that were beginning to form. For years, the Jolie-Pitt family appeared untouchable, a modern royal household that seemed to embody love, compassion, and strength. Yet behind the carefully framed photographs and red carpet appearances, the cracks were slowly beginning to show. Brad and Angelina were two of the most admired people on the planet, but their differences in vision, lifestyle, and temperament began to pull them in opposite directions. Angelina was deeply committed to humanitarian work, often traveling to war zones and refugee camps, immersing herself in global causes that demanded not just attention but sacrifice. Brad admired her passion, but he struggled to keep up with the intensity of her mission-driven life while managing his own career and the pressures of fatherhood. Their schedules grew more demanding, their disagreements more frequent. Brad's coping mechanisms became dangerous. He had always enjoyed drinking, but now alcohol became a crutch, something he used to drown the rising tension inside the home. He later admitted that his drinking had spiraled out of control during this period, turning private arguments into explosive confrontations. Angelina, fiercely protective of the children, saw his behavior as a threat to the stability of the family. What the world viewed as a dream household was, in reality, a home where stress, resentment, and unspoken fears were accumulating like storm clouds. The children, once the symbols of their united love, became the center of tension as well. Parenting 6 kids was overwhelming even for 2 of Hollywood's most powerful figures. Discipline, education, cultural identity, and the constant spotlight created challenges that could not be solved by money or fame. Brad wanted more structure, while Angelina leaned toward freedom and fluidity. Their visions clashed, and the children often found themselves caught in the middle of their parents' battle for control. Still, whenever they stepped out in public, they wore the mask of perfection. They smiled for cameras, posed as a united family, and continued to fuel the image of Hollywood's most admired couple. But behind closed doors, love was turning into tension, admiration into frustration, and a once-perfect picture into something fragile and volatile. The foundation of their dynasty was weakening, and it would only take one catastrophic moment to bring everything crashing down. The breaking point came in September 2016, aboard a private jet flying from France to Los Angeles. What should have been just another family trip turned into the moment that shattered the Jolie-Pitt dynasty. Reports later surfaced that Brad, after drinking heavily, became angry and lost control. Accounts differ on what exactly happened, but what is certain is that there was a confrontation between Brad and his eldest son, Maddox. The altercation escalated in front of the other children, leaving scars that could not be hidden behind Hollywood smiles. When the plane landed, the story did not remain within the family. Within days, the media exploded with headlines about an investigation by Child Protective Services and the FBI. Though no charges were filed, the damage was irreparable. Brad's image as the perfect father was crushed in an instant. Angelina filed for divorce just days later, citing the need to protect the children, and the world that had once adored them as a couple now watched with shock as their empire collapsed. For Brad, the incident was a moment of devastating clarity. He admitted later that his drinking had spiraled so far out of control that he had put everything he loved at risk. The father once seen carrying children lovingly through airports was now painted as volatile and dangerous. Maddox, the son he had adopted and once bonded with, distanced himself completely, reportedly refusing contact for years. That loss, more than the headlines or the public humiliation, cut Brad to the core. The fallout was merciless. The tabloids dissected every detail, turning the private pain of a broken family into entertainment for millions. Angelina was cast as the protective mother, Brad as the fallen father. Custody battles began. Each new court filing splashed across the news. The man who had once embodied the dream of Hollywood success was now fighting simply to see his children. Looking back, Brad called it a moment of awakening, the night that forced him to confront his addictions and the choices that had led him there. But at the time, it felt like the end of everything: his marriage, his family, his identity as a father. On that plane, Brad Pitt's perfect image finally came crashing down, and nothing would ever be the same again. When Angelina Jolie filed for divorce in September 2016, it sent shockwaves around the world. This was not just the end of a marriage, it was the implosion of Hollywood's most famous family. Fans who had once idolized Brangelina could hardly believe the headlines. The couple that had symbolized love, beauty, and purpose was finished, and the details were uglier than anyone could have imagined. Custody of 6 children became the central battlefield, and the divorce papers painted a picture of irreconcilable differences rooted in conflict, anger, and Brad's struggle with alcohol. The media descended like vultures. Every court appearance, every leaked document, every rumor was splashed across front pages and broadcast on endless news cycles. Angelina was portrayed as the protective mother fighting for her children, while Brad was framed as the unstable father trying to repair his broken reputation. The man who had once been the envy of the world was now a cautionary tale, dissected in public as though his private suffering was entertainment. For Brad, the divorce was more than a legal proceeding. It was a public collapse. Overnight, he lost the home he had built, the partner he had cherished, and the daily presence of his children. He admitted that during this time he would often return to an empty house and feel the silence press down on him like a weight he could not escape. He drank more heavily than ever, desperate to numb the grief and shame. Yet the more he tried to escape, the deeper he sank. The custody battle dragged on for years, with temporary arrangements, supervised visits, and lawyers negotiating every detail of when and how Brad could see his children. The man who had once been photographed as the model father now had to fight for the right to be in his children's lives. For someone who had always defined himself by family, the loss was unbearable. And yet, amid the wreckage, Brad began to realize he could not continue down the same destructive path. The divorce had stripped away the illusion of control, leaving him face to face with his own flaws and addictions. The world was watching his downfall in real time. But beneath the humiliation lay the first fragile step toward a painful, necessary transformation. If the divorce was the public collapse of Brad Pitt's life, the rift with his children was the private wound that cut deepest. After the incident on the plane, the once close bond between Brad and his eldest son Maddox was shattered. Reports spread that Maddox wanted no contact with his father, and while Brad never spoke harshly about his son, the pain of rejection was written in his silence. The boy he had once carried through airports and proudly called his own now kept him at a distance, leaving Brad with an emptiness no courtroom could heal. The fracture with Maddox rippled through the rest of the family. Pax, Zahara, and even the younger children grew wary, caught in the tension between their parents and confused by the whirlwind of media attention. Brad was granted visitation, but the arrangements were rigid, often supervised, and a reminder that he was no longer the steady presence in their daily lives. For a man who had embraced fatherhood so completely, the loss of those simple moments, bedtime stories, family meals, ordinary laughter, was devastating. In interviews, Brad admitted that he had failed, that his drinking and temper had cost him the trust of the people he loved most. He spoke of waking up and realizing he was alone, not because fate had turned against him, but because he had broken the very foundation of his family. "I lost my family," he confessed, "and that's all that matters." These words revealed not a movie star, but a father stripped of pride, haunted by guilt, and desperate for redemption. The tabloids painted the story as a custody drama, but for Brad it was far more personal. Each missed birthday, each holiday spent apart, deepened the ache. He tried to show up when he was allowed, to prove through consistency that he was still their father. But rebuilding trust takes time, and in some cases, it may never fully return. This fracture between Brad and his children became the most defining pain of his life. Fame, money, and awards could never replace the warmth of his children's arms, and without them, every success felt hollow. For a man once celebrated as Hollywood's perfect father, being shut out of his children's hearts was the cruelest twist of all. In the aftermath of his divorce and the painful distance from his children, Brad Pitt could no longer deny the truth. For years, he had masked his struggles with alcohol, convincing himself that he was in control, that drinking was simply a release after long days on set or stressful nights at home. But now the illusion was broken. His family had fractured. His reputation had been battered. And in his own words, he had lost everything. Standing at rock bottom, Brad made a choice that would alter the course of his life. He sought help. He entered therapy and embraced rehabilitation with a raw honesty that surprised many who knew him. Gone was the polished movie star, hiding behind charm and wit. In his place was a man stripped bare, admitting his weaknesses, confronting the habits that had consumed him. He openly shared later that he had been boozing too much, that alcohol had been his way of avoiding pain, anger, and fear. Sobriety was not just a necessity, it was a lifeline. Brad threw himself into recovery with the same determination that had carried him from Missouri to Hollywood. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, sitting in circles with people who had no interest in his fame, only in his humanity. He listened, he confessed, he learned. For the first time in decades, he was forced to face himself without the numbing haze of alcohol. He called it a profound awakening, a painful but cleansing process that forced him to look at the wreckage of his life and begin rebuilding from the ground up. The public saw glimpses of this transformation. In interviews, Brad spoke candidly about his addiction, refusing to sugarcoat the damage it had done. He described how he would come home to an empty house and pour himself a drink, only to feel more hollow than before. He admitted that he had been running from his emotions, running from the shame of failure, until there was nothing left to run from. For someone who had always seemed larger than life, this vulnerability was startling, and it made him human in a way that resonated deeply with people who had admired him from afar. Rehab was not a quick fix. It was a daily battle, a constant reminder that recovery is a process, not a destination. But for Brad, it was also the first real step toward reclaiming himself. He could not undo the past, but he could face the future with clearer eyes and a stronger resolve. For the first time in years, Brad Pitt was sober, and with sobriety came the faint hope that he might one day repair what had been broken. In 2020, Brad Pitt stood on the stage of the Academy Awards, holding the golden statue that had eluded him for decades. For his role in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he finally won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. The audience gave him a standing ovation. The cameras captured his charming smile, and the world saw a man at the pinnacle of his craft. It should have been the ultimate victory, the crowning moment of a legendary career. Yet behind that triumphant smile was an emptiness that no award could fill. For years, Brad had been nominated, celebrated, and admired, but the Oscar had always slipped through his fingers. Winning, it was supposed to bring validation, to silence the doubts, to prove that he was not just a movie star but an actor of substance. And yet, when the moment finally came, he felt strangely hollow. He admitted in later interviews that he had stopped believing in the power of awards to give meaning. The statue was beautiful, yes, but it did not erase the fact that his marriage had collapsed, his children were distant, and his private life was a storm of regret. As he delivered his acceptance speech, filled with wit and gratitude, those watching had no idea of the battles raging inside him. To the public, it was a story of redemption. Brad Pitt, rising from scandal and heartbreak to stand as a champion once more. But to Brad, it was just another mask, another performance, another reminder that success in Hollywood could never compensate for failure at home. Later that night, as the celebrations swirled around him, he was left with the same silence he had carried since the divorce. The Oscar sat heavy in his hands, a symbol of achievement but also of irony. He had reached the peak of his profession at the very moment when his personal life was at its lowest. Fame had given him everything he thought he wanted, but happiness remained out of reach. This contradiction, triumph on screen, tragedy off-screen, became the story of Brad Pitt's later years. He had conquered Hollywood, but he had not conquered himself. And no golden statue, no applause, no career milestone could change that truth. As the years passed and Brad Pitt moved into his late 50s, the image of Hollywood's eternal golden boy began to fade. The man who had once defined youth and charisma was now facing the inevitability of age. His hair carried more gray, his face bore the marks of time, and while the cameras still adored him, he no longer chased the spotlight the way he once did. Instead, Brad began to step back, choosing silence and solitude over the frenzy of Hollywood life. The gossip columns that had once followed every detail of his love life now struggled to find stories. Brad no longer paraded romances across red carpets or sought attention at glamorous parties. He retreated from the endless swirl of Hollywood's social life, preferring the quiet of his home and the company of only a trusted few. To outsiders, this retreat looked like mystery, but for Brad, it was survival. After years of public scrutiny and personal collapse, he had learned that peace could not be found in flashing lights but only in stillness. Friends described him as more reflective, more guarded, and more comfortable with simplicity. He often spent time alone, reading, meditating, or working on his art. The Brad Pitt of magazine covers was giving way to a man who was less concerned with charm and more with authenticity. Fame had once been his fuel, but now it felt more like a shadow he could never escape. By pulling back, he tried to find clarity in the silence. And yet, aging brought with it a deep awareness of loss. He was no longer the young father who carried 6 children on his shoulders, no longer the husband who was half of Hollywood's most powerful couple. He was a man who had known love and watched it vanish, who had built a family and seen it fracture. The silence he embraced was healing, but it was also a reminder of everything that had slipped through his hands. As he approached 60, Brad Pitt stood in the strange space between legend and man. To the world, he was still the star whose smile had defined a generation. To himself, he was simply trying to live quietly, to grow older without bitterness, and to search for a peace that fame had promised but never delivered. In the quiet that followed his retreat from the Hollywood spotlight, Brad Pitt found an unexpected refuge in art. He began sculpting, creating pieces out of stone and clay that reflected the turmoil and emotions he had carried for years. Unlike acting, which required him to wear someone else's mask, sculpting demanded honesty. Each piece was a dialogue with his own pain, his regrets, and his longing for renewal. In the silence of his studio, surrounded by tools and unfinished works, he was no longer Brad Pitt, the movie star. He was simply a man trying to heal. He described the process as meditative, a way to channel the chaos of his past into something tangible. Hours would pass as he chipped away at marble or shaped clay, each strike of the chisel a small release of anger, each curve of the sculpture a fragile attempt at forgiveness. For Brad, art became therapy, a space where he could confront emotions that words or performances could never capture. Friends who visited his studio spoke of how focused he became while working, almost disappearing into the art itself. He often avoided talking about Hollywood, preferring instead to discuss form, texture, and the search for meaning through creation. It was a sharp contrast to the man the world had known for decades, the charming actor whose life had played out on screens and tabloids. Now, the true Brad Pitt revealed himself quietly, in pieces of stone and clay, hidden away from the eyes of millions. This turn to art was not just a hobby, it was a symbol of transformation. Where fame had once consumed him, now he sought peace in craftsmanship. Where alcohol had dulled his emotions, now creativity forced him to feel them fully. The studio became a sanctuary, a place where he could reshape not just the material before him, but his own sense of self. Yet even as he poured himself into this new passion, the scars of his past never vanished. Each sculpture carried traces of sorrow, echoes of a man who had lost too much. Art was healing, but it was also confession, a way of admitting without words that the pain was still there, etched into him as permanently as the lines on his face. Even as Brad Pitt embraced art and silence, the outside world remained obsessed with his love life. Every time he was seen with a woman, whether at a gallery opening, a charity event, or even just leaving a restaurant, the tabloids erupted with speculation. Headlines screamed about secret romances, whirlwind affairs, and the possibility of a new great love. Yet time and again, those rumors faded. Brad never confirmed them, never paraded a new partner before the cameras. never allowed the media the satisfaction of another golden couple narrative. For someone who had once lived at the center of the world's most famous love triangle, this withdrawal from public romance was startling. In the past, his relationships had defined him as much as his films, shaping the way people saw him. But now, he seemed determined to live differently. Friends said that Brad was cautious, wary of exposing his private life to the scrutiny that had once destroyed it. He valued companionship, but he no longer sought validation through grand displays of love in the public eye. Instead, solitude became his constant companion. At 60, Brad Pitt was no longer the man chasing the adrenaline of Hollywood parties or high-profile romances. He often spent evenings alone in his studio, or with a close circle of trusted friends who valued him not for his fame but for his humanity. He admitted that he had learned to enjoy his own company, to find peace in the quiet moments where there was no audience, no cameras, no expectations. Yet this solitude was bittersweet. While it protected him from the chaos of the spotlight, it also highlighted the distance from the life he had once dreamed of. The father surrounded by 6 children, the husband in a powerful marriage, the man who was once half of Hollywood's most glamorous couple. Those versions of Brad belonged to the past. In their place was a man still searching, still carrying the wounds of betrayal, addiction, and fractured family ties. The world still speculates about who Brad Pitt loves today, but the truth is that the person he is most focused on learning to live with is himself. Solitude, for Brad, is not just an escape but a test, a question of whether he can find wholeness without the validation of romance or the illusion of perfection. As Brad Pitt entered his 60s, the conversation about him shifted from gossip to legacy. For more than 3 decades, he had been one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, a symbol of both Hollywood glamour and serious artistry. He had gone from the heartthrob drifter in Thelma and Louise to a leading man in epic romances, then proven his depth in thrillers like Seven and Fight Club. Later, he became a respected producer, bringing films like 12 Years a Slave to life and earning accolades not just for acting but for shaping powerful stories. His career told a story of reinvention, of a man who refused to be boxed in by his looks or defined by his past. Critics now spoke of him with a reverence that once seemed reserved for the legends of old Hollywood. He had outlasted trends, survived scandals, and still commanded respect with every role he chose. Younger actors looked to him as proof that longevity in the industry was possible, even in an age obsessed with youth and novelty. Yet Brad himself remained uneasy with the word legacy. He once said that awards and fame were fleeting, that what mattered was whether his work meant something, whether it touched people beyond the surface. Still, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. He had become exactly what he once feared, an icon. His face, his roles, his name were now woven into the fabric of cinematic history. But behind that achievement lay the shadow of personal heartbreak. For every masterpiece on screen, there was a broken piece of his private life that reminded him of the cost of greatness. To his fans, he was proof of resilience, the star who had fallen and risen again. To himself, he was still just a man trying to reconcile glory with regret. Hollywood will always remember Brad Pitt as one of its brightest lights. But what the history books will not show is the pain behind that golden smile, the sacrifices that fame demanded, and the loneliness that success could never cure. His legacy is not just the films or the awards, it is the story of a man who had everything, lost almost everything, and kept going. That story, as much as any performance, is what ensures his place among the greats. At 60, Brad Pitt stands as a paradox, a man whose life has been both a dream and a cautionary tale. To the public, he is still the golden star who defined an era, the face of countless films, the actor who finally earned his Oscar and secured his place in Hollywood's pantheon. But to himself, he is something far more fragile. A father who lost the daily presence of his children, a husband who watched love dissolve into bitterness, and a man who spent years trying to drown his demons in alcohol before finally confronting them in silence. He once confessed that fame is a trick, an illusion that convinces you the applause will fill the void inside. Yet when the lights fade and the crowds go home, the silence remains, and it is in that silence where the truth lives. For Brad, that truth has been painful. He has lived the extremes of human experience, idolized by millions, condemned by scandal, rebuilt through art and sobriety. His story is not just about stardom, but about survival, about learning to exist when perfection collapses. In recent years, he has spoken less and less about his private life, perhaps because words cannot capture the complexity of what he carries. The world still speculates about his romances, about his children, about whether he is happy. But Brad Pitt seems to have accepted that the answers may never belong to anyone but himself. What matters now is not how others see him, but whether he can finally see himself clearly. The tragedy of Brad Pitt is not that he lost fame or fortune, but that he lost the simple joys he once believed would complete him: a family at the dinner table, laughter echoing through the halls of his home, the embrace of children who looked at him without doubt. And yet, his resilience lies in his willingness to keep searching. Through art, through solitude, through quiet reflection, he continues to carve out a life that may one day bring him the peace he has long sought. Brad Pitt's story is not over. It is a reminder that behind even the brightest smile can lie unspeakable pain, and that even those who seem to have everything can still be haunted by what they have lost. His journey remains unfinished, but perhaps in that incompleteness lies the most human truth of all, that we are all searching for redemption, for connection, and for a peace that no applause can ever provide.